Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajeem. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu-alaikum. Jiayanu, Pakhera-gale, Nihao, Chunashumme, Washmale. Ohaya Gonzaimas, Guten Morgen, Hola, Bonjour, Privyet, Kaifahal, Hale Shuma Chatore, Ahlan Masalam, Marhaba, Buna, Mucho, Gracias, Swabia, Bhalli Karaya, Hosh Galden, Anayo Sayo, Huya Mora, Chivato, Chihal Yud, Kalimera, and a very warm welcome to everybody who's tuned into PTV World and watching World this morning. Alongside my very well-learned colleague who happens to be Ms. Hajar Sati. I happen to be Shahzad Hassan Khan, and we hope and pray that everybody out there is doing wonderfully well and that you're ready to kickstart your week with us. But first things first, hello Hajra, how are you doing today?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for introducing me. Jazakallah khair. It's Monday morning and it's very bright and sunny, and it's such a quandary to decide what to wear, because when we come in the morning it's very cold, and when we go away, pack up, it's really hot. So the weather is very confusing as to what sort of weather we having, because in the morning it's winter, in the evening it is spring, or by the noon it's spring. Pardon. So having said so, Shahzad, we always talk about that Twitter and what sort of effect the social media has on our bearing and on our existence, and how it has impacted the text-based approach, because the social media is nowadays more of a pictorial representation, and I think that has really shortened our attention span, and a lot of people who are engaged in the reading or in the long format reading, they're really disturbed by how social media is working. So I would like to ask you and throw you this question: how do you see the role of social media in generating a discourse, and what sort of relationship do you harbor with it?
I mean, if we are to kind of speak about social media over here, my opinion is going to be very different from you, and it's because of the fact that that we come from different backgrounds, and the way we relate with things can certainly be different for people from different walks of life. So for me, I believe that social media has actually, as a nation, given us more awareness, exposure to things which we never knew about previously, but now since we do know about it, I mean, there might not be anything that we can still do about it, So I think that's the way I would want to put social media, that most of the time people do think that it's going to be very effective, impactful, it will bring us knowledge and exposure and whatnot. But half of the time, I don't think that people are using it correctly, because when we say social, I think what we really need to do is connect with people. But here we are, where people are not liking anybody's post, not retweeting, so things like that. I believe that, where you said that people, or the people who actually read books, are kind of, not taking it very wisely. But I believe for me, for somebody who actually learns from pictures better than reading words, I think that it works for me. It helps me, because for a person who's on television screen, really certainly wants to bring in some more knowledge and information, and that too in the shortest span of time. So imagine that, having that pictorial memory actually helps me bring you all of that information which I share with you. But the best part over here is that most of the time the audiences do not kind of rain check whether the information they're going to share with the audiences on their social media pages or the fans who follow them, they certainly do not keep a rain check in place whether that the research they're sharing is authentic or not. And I think that's where I would want people to put in a little more effort, because research is something which we certainly need to make sure whether the facts we are sharing are authentic or not. That's it.
I think wonderful for saying that, because you believe that the pictorial representation is more a wise thing for you. But in general, if you look at how, Quran mentions about the general state of the humans, or a man in particular, so it's not a very great sort of an account which Quran mentions, because Quran always mentions that how a human or a man is a very arrogant and very ignorant. And in general, if you take out this perspective from the historical greater perspective, and if you look at it, you've seen what happened with Plato. He was murdered by the people. What happened with the Socrates? They were very, very wise people in the society, and people in general don't like to invest more on wisdom, or they do not like to listen to the greater truths out there, right? So I think it's validated if you look at that way. And certainly that is the case with the social media, because I think social media is in the hands of the commoners, the masses, and they do not have that much of wisdom. Obviously intellectuals are also taking place there, but if in general you see the quality of the debate that is happening on the social media, I feel that there's a lot of incivility in that debate, and for me that is very worrisome, because I do remember I used to engage a lot with the social media, but by watching what sort of debates are happening, and by watching sort of acrimony that is going on, the inflammatory content that is being put out there, and extreme political polarization and the fragmentation which is going on because of the social media, because the like-minded people connect on social media and they do not come out from that shell is sort of a worrying for me. But we'll see in the future how this debates roll on and what sort of conversations that we are starting out of it.
Yeah, Haja, thank you so much for saying that, because I believe that I'm going to allude to that too.
Okay.
But you know, I believe that, you know, just talking about social media is not only going to kind of settle this argument in between you and me, whether wisdom is something which we drive from social media or is it what we drive from experiences. So I believe for people who are actually living a very healthier life or making sure that they're making the right decisions in life, in their heads, they're the wisest people around. So for everybody who's out there, ladies and gentlemen, if you think that you're wise enough, please make sure that you keep it like that, and make sure that, you know, that you're always open to criticism, because people who are open to criticism are the people who can develop themselves again and again, make sure that they learn, and then at the same time progress in life. But having said so,
I think I would like to add the healthy criticism with the adjective before the criticism, because
I don't know whether criticism can be healthy or not, but it is for the people who receive it to decide whether it was healthy for them or not.
Okay,
let's keep it this way.
Okay, so let's keep it that way. Moving on to our top stories, which is Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has invited Qatari investors to take advantage of the investment-friendly policies of the Pakistani government. Prime Minister said this while talking to the CEO of the Qatar Investment Authority, Mansoor Ibrahim Al Mahmoud, in Doha. They also highlighted the investment opportunities in the energy infrastructure of Pakistan. And I think, Shehzad, this is a very wise move, because considering the fact that we are really hounded by this environment crisis, by this climate change crisis, and we have seen that how the global warming is badly affecting this entire region. So investing in the clean and the renewable energies or in the solar energy is the answer, not just to the rising inflation, but also to more environment friendly solutions or the smart solutions.
Exactly, and that's something which is the need of the hour for a country like Pakistan. But now moving on, where first up, obviously condolences, inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi rajiun. The veteran Pakistani actor Muhammad Qavi Khan passed away. He was 80 years old, and the renowned actor died of a prolonged illness and was in Canada for treatment, where he breathed his last. Born in Peshawar in 1942, Khan started his career at a young age at Radio Pakistan, Peshawar. From there, he rose to the stardom in Pakistan television and films. In 1964, he was one of the few actors who witnessed the decline of the film industry up close.
Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi rajiun.
चाहिए सर, बेख्तियार तो नहीं है आप? मैं हूं सर, मैं उन्हें तहफ़्फ़ुज़ देना चाहता हूं, मगर मुल्ज़िमान के हाथ मेरे इख्तियारात से बहुत लंबे हैं.
And Haja, you know, I'll be very honest that, you know, I was lucky enough to have worked with him in a drama serial which we were shooting in Karachi. The name of the drama serial was Shab-e Arzu Ka Alam. And, you know, I just couldn't keep my calm just because of the fact that I was working with such a fine actor, and just felt wonderful to be around him. And he was always very kind to share his stories, you know, because we would, you know, so for example, if it is not our shot and, you know, if we are sitting down having a cup of tea, I would always want to sit down with him, and then he was always very welcoming. He would always say, beta, you know, aa jao, baith jao, and then he will discuss or share his stories. And then he was into real estate, so he would call me that, okay, how's real estate doing in Islamabad? So may his soul rest in peace, and condolences for the bereaved as well, and patience for the bereaved.
And I think there's no doubt when we say that Qavi Khan was an institution in himself, because he taught so many people. He has one of the finest performances on the screen, and I think we are very proud that we shared the same screen which he once shared. Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi rajiun once again, and once again, may his soul rest in peace. Moving on to another top story, which is about the Middle East Youth Summit 2023. Which is first of its kind summit that is being held in the holy city of Makkah from 28th February to 4th March. It envisaged to gather young Muslim leaders from around the world to find the solutions to contemporary problems faced by Muslim world. Muslim leaders from Indonesia, Turkey, Bangladesh, Mauritius, Pakistan, Malaysia and Singapore, Brunei, Darul Islam and Uzbekistan participated in this summit. The CEO and the DG Human Security Institute, Rafiq Ahmad Qureshi, represented Pakistan in this summit. Participants deliberated upon the economic, environmental, educational, health, natural calamities and human security issues facing by the Muslim world. And I think these are the problems which are not just faced by the Muslim world, and I think they are faced by the globally, by the international arena in that sense. So before we progress in our program more, I think it's time for a short break, so don't go anywhere.
Gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you very much for staying tuned. It's wonderful to have you on board as well, ladies and gentlemen. For everybody who's just tuned in, I happen to be Shahzad Khan, and with me, I'm very lucky to have been joined by my very well-learned colleague who happens to be Ms. Hajar Satti. Earlier, we were busy with the top stories, but now it's about time where, before heading out towards a short break, we spoke about natural calamities and other issues which the world is facing because of climate change. But ladies and gentlemen, I think there are other issues at hand which we certainly really need to prioritize. And there are other partners for Pakistan who have been making sure that they're going to help us by lending a hand of help. And in that perspective, ladies and gentlemen, we would certainly like to talk about children who were out of school. You know, for example, if we are to go back in time from 2011 till 2018, you know, this helping hand, we will be talking about, you know, the entire program, ladies and gentlemen. I just do not want, or I do not feel like giving it away just like this, ladies and gentlemen. Imagine that 55% enrollment increase from 2011 to 2018 when we speak about children's education. Not just that, if we are to talk about Punjab, ladies and gentlemen, approximately 1.23 million attended school for free. If we talk about Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, ladies and gentlemen, there were 2.6 million children who didn't go to public schools but actually went to low-cost private schools as well and got education. And imagine that these are the flag bearers, these are the bearers of the future of Pakistan, and who contributed towards us. Who was that angel in disguise, ladies and gentlemen? I think it's about time that we introduce them. Haja, why don't you do the honors?
Okay, so we are very glad that we have been joined by Judith Herbertson, who happens to be the head of the Girls Education Department. Assalamu alaikum, hello and welcome to our show.
Thank you so much. Wa alaikum salam. Good morning.
Jazakallah.
Okay, so joining Miss Judith, we have Rachel Hinton. She happens to be the head of the Global Research. Assalamu alaikum, hello and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Thank you very much for welcoming us.
And joining Ms. Rachel, we have Saima Anwar, who happens to be Senior Education Advisor. Assalamu alaikum and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So we are going to have a conference here in Pakistan, which is going to be slated from 7th till 8th of the March, right? So Ms. Judith, what is this conference generally about and how do you spell out the main points of that conference?
What I'd like to talk about first is why the UK is focused on this conference and focused on education in Pakistan.
Okay.
You talked about wise decisions. Now, every parent across the world wants a better life for their children than they've had themselves. And investing in education is the wisest decision that they can take. Education is a basic human right. But that means for all children, as you say, not just the ones at the elite school, not the ones in the posh schools, those who can just about afford low-cost private school, but also those that have to go to the free schools. Imagine that girl, a rural area, maybe her father's already died, maybe her mother's struggling to earn enough money, maybe she's disabled, maybe she's malnourished, maybe there are other problems after the pandemic. What we're interested in is making sure that that girl is able to go to school, stay in school and complete an education. And that's why the UK has made a commitment to delivering 12 years of quality education for all girls everywhere globally. We on Wednesday, which is International Women's Day, are going to be publishing a new women and girls strategy, which has 3 priorities. And number 1 is educating girls. Number 2, empowering women and girls. And number 3, ending violence against women and girls. Now, why do we focus on the girls? It's not because we're not interested in the boys. That description I gave you could as equally well have applied to a boy as it did to a girl.
True.
But if we think about girls, how many of them don't go to school? I'm not going to recite the numbers to you, but far fewer girls go to school than boys go to school.
True.
Far more girls drop out at different stages of their education than boys do. Parents will preference the boys over the girls. There are social norms, there's menstruation, there are key parts of a woman's life cycle that means that they become disadvantaged in comparison with the boys. But if we educate a girl, there are intergenerational benefits. She'll get married later, she'll have fewer children, she will educate her own children, she'll vaccinate her children, she'll know how to give them good food, and the earning potentials, both for her and her own children, are exponentially improved if she has had not just 1 year, not just basic education, but 12 years of quality education.
Exactly, and I truly understand that, and you wonderfully explained it to us as well, that why girls' education is important, and I 100% believe in it. But there's always a different perspective. There would always be people who would think that, okay, if as a father, don't you think that we'll be educating our children at the same time? So how would you defer to that? For men or boys' education, yes.
Girls and boys both have to be educated.
Thank you so much.
But boys will go to school anyway, and if we can improve systems, if we can improve the access to education, if we can improve what teachers do in the classroom, if we can improve the school infrastructure, so there's water, there are washrooms, there are walls, there's electricity for all children, the boys will go anyway. But if we focus on the girls will also come. And we've also learnt that one of the biggest influences we can have is persuading parents, mothers and fathers and communities of the benefits of education, and that's for all children. We can't leave one gender behind. Of course we do boys as well, but they don't need talking about as much as the girls.
Wow, wonderful. So thank you very much for explaining it to the people who might just have this idea in their mind. But now moving on to Saima over here, because Saima, we're talking about 12 long years of UK's collaboration, making sure that they're going to work over here in Pakistan and make sure that our girls, our daughters, our mothers, our sisters will get education, and that too for free. Can you please speak about some different programs which were conducted during these 12 years or a decade long of education? I think let's speak about that.
Thank you. So over the last 10 or 12 years, the UK has been a significant partner in education in Pakistan. And I would speak first about two very large bilateral education sector reform programs, both for KP and Punjab. These two programs basically provided technical assistance and some financial assistance to both the provincial governments to improve access and learning outcomes for the most marginalized children. These two programs were complemented by a national campaign. Some of you in the media might have heard about it, the Alif Elan campaign, which significantly increased sort of the volume of discussion and debate around education. And according to what our evaluation, this increased almost tenfold after this campaign. So, and then finally, a third element was grants to not-for-profit organizations to provide the space for innovation to flourish. And together this sort of brought our whole portfolio of education support in Pakistan to over £900 million over the last 12 years, and sort of many different programs. For the governments in particular, we supported them a lot and worked with them a lot on improving the use of data for planning and for management and for accountability. We've also worked quite a lot to improve access to education for the most disadvantaged children, and that includes girls, children with disabilities, and children from religious minorities. You already mentioned public-private partnerships. That's been a huge part of UK's investment in Punjab in particular. And then finally, on another, we have now, we think we've supported more qualified teachers, more teachers in schools attending regularly and better trained.
And just very quickly before we move on to Ms. Rachel over here, so you spoke about the technical assistance program. Now, what you said was that that we were doing partnerships with the local governments, may it be Punjab or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. But how does it work? Because, for example, if we are to talk about how those £900 million were being spent over the span of 12 years, we really need to ensure and make sure that, okay, that whatever amount which was given to the local governments have been spent in the rightful way. So do we actually keep a check as well that, okay, how many children were being educated, whether are we focusing on their syllabi, are we advancing it to that extent that they're learning all of those modern techniques which we should be, probably?
Yes, so yeah, we do keep a track of that, and we do regular evaluations, and I think the results sort of speak for themselves. Especially in these two provinces, we've seen significant increases in enrollment, and that is despite the rapid population growth in Pakistan. So the numbers of out of school children have gone down, but of course we still have lots of out of school children in the country. We have more knowledgeable and skillful teachers, as I said, and they're turning up more regularly to schools. And we also have better school facilities in some of the schools in these two provinces.
And the enrollment increased by 55% from 2011 till 2018, and that's where Ms. Haima said that the results actually speak about it. Yes.
And moving to Ms. Rachel, since you are the head of the research, so how important do you think research is, especially when we talk about improving education or hinging our curriculum, and especially what is the Pakistan's contribution towards the research in the education sector?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, we do believe that evidence is absolutely fundamental to help us inform what's going on and the big reforms that are needed. You talked about this universality of education being necessary, but that actually requires really significant fundamental system change. You know, if every child is going to have the dignity, if every child is going to have the self-worth, and every child is going to have that freedom to define their own destinies that we all strive for.
True.
And interestingly, Pakistan is actually one of the leaders globally in the field of research and evidence. And I had the great privilege to recently visit your beautiful city of Lahore and meet some of the world-class academics there. In fact, other countries are learning from what your academic community is doing here in Pakistan. Bela Jamil, you may know of, who leads the ASA initiative, citizen-led assessments of children and their learning. You asked the question, you know, how do we know? We have these programs, but what difference does it make?
True.
And that's absolutely at the heart of many of the fine academics here in this country. Tahir Andrabi, who was of course the inaugural dean at LUMS, he also sits as one of the distinguished members of a new global panel on education, where they look at all the evidence across the globe and summarize that to help governments make difficult decisions. We don't pretend that it's easy. Resources are always constrained.
Yeah.
So what's really different about the way in which Tahir and others on the panel operate is they don't just look at what works, but they look at what works at what cost. So that it's not just, is this intervention a good one or not? It's, is it a good one, and what does it cost for the government to implement that initiative?
And obviously when we talk about education, and I think we had programs on this topic, particularly when we talk about what should be the main approach when we talk about the primary education or the secondary education. So it's mostly hinge around the knowledge-based approach, in which the teacher is the main center of the class and it's based on the teacher-based pedagogy. But when we talk about the digitalization, when we talk about how we need the core competencies in terms of the critical thinking to compete in this era and to adapt to this particular era. So world is moving from the knowledge-based approach towards the skill-based approach, right? So what do you have to say in terms of the research? So where are we progressing? Because I do believe in Pakistan, we mostly, our education system is hinged around the knowledge-based approach, not the skill-based approach.
Thank you very much for asking this question, Hajra.
Yes, please go ahead, Ms. Rachel.
No, this is a really important question, and we actually have a very interesting program, a research program on systems that operates here in Pakistan, and a program also that we've got coming up on data and research called DARE, that's really looking at some of these things. And what we need is to support this shift from just rote learning and memorization to, as you say, the skills that children actually need. And one of the programs that is being led by Maruf Saeed in SERP is around what they call targeted instruction. So you actually support and target children to, rather than memorize, to actually help support them with that learning journey.
Thank you very much for saying so, and I wish that, you know, when I was going to school, there were people who were talking about it, that we certainly do not need to memorize only, but rather target and make sure that we can reproduce it in our words. But unfortunately, it didn't really happen, which is why I got the scolding from my parents. Wasn't really a good student because couldn't really memorize it, you know. There were no pictures in the books, which I was like, okay, you know, I can memorize that. But having said so, Ms. Judith, I would want to come back to you where you know, Pakistan has witnessed the worst floods because of climate change. We're at the front line and we're the most vulnerable nations across the globe as well when we speak about climate change. How do you think that in the longer run or in the coming days or in the coming years, it will affect education?
It's going to have an enormous effect on education. What we've been hearing, there are 22 million children out of school in Pakistan, which I'm sorry to say is the highest number globally for any country. And there are 5 million more children being added every year. Now the system has to be so strong in order to absorb that number of children. And just to add as well, the key is what you were saying is about getting all children to learn foundational skills. They need to learn to read, they need to learn to do basic numeracy, and they need those sort of learning how to learn skills, how to get along with people, socio-emotional skills. At the same time, we've got this enormous climate change, environmental degradation, loss of biodiversity challenge coming at us globally. And Pakistan, sadly, is right on the front line of that. I mean, globally, we're seeing these crises, be it floods, droughts, hurricanes, damage to crops, damage to shelters, at 5 times the level of 40 years ago.
That's true.
And in any one year, 40 million children's education is going to be disrupted.
That's true.
And we focused on the health impacts, the infrastructure impacts, the agricultural impacts, the access to clean water impacts. What we haven't done yet enough is looked at that interplay between children's learning, schools, and climate change. If they lose the infrastructure, if they can't reach the infrastructure, if the teachers can't get to school, if their parents then have to keep them out of school because they've fallen back into poverty, or they need the extra pairs of hands at home in order to keep the family unit basically with the show on the road, then it's very, very hard for children to carry on through these massive disasters that we're experiencing. And Pakistan, unfortunately, is seeing desertification, but it's also seeing floods. It's seeing droughts which are affecting the crops, but it's also seeing very, very heavy monsoons now, as we've seen over multiple years, but clearly last year was disastrous. The numbers of people that died, the numbers of schools that have been either destroyed or damaged, the numbers of children who have had their education disrupted. Now, what we're trying to do with this new paper that we've already put out is look at the long-term benefits of building a more resilient infrastructure, but also a more resilient system at the government level. And your government is fully committed to this. You've got some excellent examples of what they're already doing. And after all, your Honourable Prime Minister was one of our strongest partners and advocates when he was Chief Minister down in Punjab.
Exactly.
So he is well aware of all of this. And what we need to make sure is that we've got a resilient system, but also what goes on in the classroom, teachers, children, out to parents, out to their communities, builds a real knowledge of disaster risk reduction, adaptation of agriculture, how to harvest water, how to have the skills to not just advocate for action against climate change, but take action there on the ground. We need to educate not just the next generation of climate experts, but the next generation who are going to have to deal with the legacy we're leaving them, which we shouldn't be, and we should apologise for that, but really they're going to have to learn from a very young age how to build systems and ways of living that are resilient to these shocks.
Exactly. And, thank you so much for saying that. And certainly, obviously, we might not even feel like that, that we have to let you go as well and, kind of learn on building those systems. But since we have come across losses of worth $40 billion, and obviously a lot of schools and infrastructure has been damaged and, has had a negative impact because of the vulnerability we had to climate change. But how do you think that this program, A Decade of Learning, is actually going to help rebuild that infrastructure if you are going to do so? And God forbid for, all of those people who live within that region which is most vulnerable to climate change, do you think that we'll have more awareness campaigns from this program?
I think we're absolutely bound to, because we have to learn quickly as we go along.
True.
We need long-term research to build the evidence so that we know what works. Foundational learning works. When it comes to climate change, we're going to have to learn much more quickly.
True.
Now, the UK, in response to the awful floods, put in nearly £30 million. The Ministry of Defence provided boats and generators. We've provided kits in order that children get back into school.
Wow.
We've put money through Education Cannot Wait, the global humanitarian response organisation for disasters in education. We've put money through the Global Partnership for Education, which will work with your government at the federal and at the provincial levels to help rebuild systems and, as you say, rebuild that resilience that they're going to need so quickly. And then we're working with, of course, all the INGOs and your very good NGOs on the ground to try to help individual families and communities. But we do need to learn, and it will be a strong theme over the next couple of days. You have the expertise, it's about applying them.
Wow. Wonderful.
So moving to Ms. Rachel, so we have this Global Evidence Advocacy Panel for Education coming up, right? What is it about and how Pakistani academics are involved in this initiative?
Thank you very much. The Global Evidence Panel is the panel that puts out the Smart Buys report. In fact, many of your readers may have come across this first publication that talks about, in very simple terms, 4 key areas. It's not just the great buys and the good buys on what works, but we also need to know what doesn't work. And sometimes I think as decision makers and governments, we're afraid to stop doing things that don't work. And I loved what your starting points around healthy criticism. It's so important, that, us being brave enough to say, let's stop doing something. And often the very things that we think are the most important end up, when we do the research, being the things that don't work. And that's why it's such a pleasure to be in this country with so many critical thinkers, so many academics who understand that and are prepared to interrogate the work. That this is what the JEEP panel is about. And actually, it was a piece of research done by Tahir and Drabi about the devastating earthquake in 2005. That has taught the world many things about the problem of school closures during COVID. Because what they found during that period was that children living close to the fault line, they not only lost the learning from not being in school during that period, but actually their learning losses continued to exacerbate because when they went back to school, they'd missed out and they couldn't catch up. And so 3 years later, their learning outcomes were worse than the children 20 kilometers away from the fault line. And that's taught us and the world a lot around the impacts of the additional learning loss we see from COVID as well.
So how do we make it better then?
So we talk about 5 facts, 5 acts that we need to make action on if we're going to make progress. And the first one is committing to foundational learning, and this is all very much about Simon's program on the Decade of Learning. We need to measure regularly and reliably what children know, so we know which ones are falling behind. Then we need to, thirdly, align the system to make sure the curriculum is at the level of the child. In many countries, we're teaching children 2 years in advance of what they know. Suppose someone's teaching you subtraction and you don't even know your numbers. It's happening across many schools.
Imagine, my wife sent my daughter to school when she was only 2 years old and I was against it. I was like, why would you do that? See, I think, while you guys are here, I would want to ask you people, what is the right age for a child to go to school?
Well, actually, starting early is very, very important.
Okay, so my wife, you were right, all right?
Good decision.
I'm sorry, it was a good decision. That was a wise decision. Please continue.
But doing it in the right way and doing it without the memorization and rote learning we talked about. So the fourth action is to support teachers to have those skills, to teach in ways that inspire children, that encourage curiosity, which is a critical thing. And the last thing, again, goes back to your question about healthy criticism. The last act is to adapt whatever you bring in, to keep looking at it. Don't just adopt something because it's got the best evidence, because during this conference in the next few days, we're going to hear a lot of evidence and research. Don't just adopt it, but adapt it to your context and iterate and have that healthy criticism through the whole process.
Wow, it's wonderful and wonderfully explained as well. But very quickly, Haja, just one simple question which I would want to pose to Ms. Saima over here, and then you can ask all the questions you want because I know you're holding back a few questions. Ms. Saima, now the question is that when we speak about out-of-school children, and the number is enormous, it's 22 million children out there. Now, I do see that, when I come across a few parents and they're like, hey, you know what, by the end of the day, after all of that education part of their life, they'll still be earning money. So why not get them into the process early on so that they can contribute to the well-being of the entire family? So now, do we put in that research that how many people are only focusing on whether the child really needs to get only vocational trainings, or probably a skill at the dispense of their hand with which they can contribute towards their family? Because that 22 million number is not only about the children who cannot afford to go to school, it's about parents who do not want to send their children to school, it's about parents who want their children to kind of contribute to the well-being of the family. So how do we kind of differentiate amongst the different groups in between these 22 million children which are out of school, and how are we trying to help them with this program, A Decade of Learning?
So, thank you. While we still struggle with this challenge of out of school children, and it's important, and we need to get children into school, the other sort of challenge that Pakistan still faces is a learning crisis.
Okay.
So, we know that 8 in 10 children who are in school actually are not able to read a basic paragraph in their mother tongue by the age of 10.
Okay.
So, we are struggling with these dual challenges. So, we focus on bringing more children in school, and we also need to improve learning for children who are already in school. And that's a very big challenge, and I think that's where what Rachel mentioned about what works is really important for us, and what works more cost effectively is even more important. So, this decade of learning and the programs that we've had over the last 10-12 years, we've learned many things. We've learned what works, but we've also learned what doesn't work. And over the next 2 days in the conference, we want to be reflecting on some of these successes, but also the challenges going forward, with a lot of our partners who have worked with us, including both the federal and provincial governments, a host of partners, academics, and researchers. And we're hoping that this discussion deliberation will help us come up with a better way forward for the future of Pakistan.
Inshallah. So, you want to add something? Please go ahead.
Yes, I just the very interesting conference we had hosted by Faisal Bari at LUMS.
Yes.
We talked about the fact that schooling doesn't equal learning.
Yes,
Okay.
that's true.
And
Thank you for saying that. My parents never understood that.
And the RISE program that's led by Lant Pritchett amongst others showed that they interviewed 684 senior officials, government officials, and 80% of them overestimated the learning that was coming out of the school system. So our perception of what's happening in schools isn't always very accurate.
Okay, so one last question before we wrap up our segment. So, Ms. Judith, there are different stream of thoughts within the feminist academic courses, and especially women are not homogeneous groups, right? We all agree on that because they are based in a different regions, in a different context, in different ethnicities. And when we say women are not homogeneous group, this criticism was leveled by the women from the global south, and when they talked about it, that how white women had actually this sort of savior complex, and because of that they do not allow the women empowerment in the global south within their own context and within their own different backgrounds, right? So whenever you are designing a campaign, and especially you're focusing on the female education a lot more, how do you deal with this criticism of the white women savior complex? Because a lot of time these discussions are coming from the global south and they're directed towards the global north in this context.
Only if you think it exists.
I think it does exist. I think you've put your finger on it, and I would hate to think that we are still, I suspect we have done it in the past, walking in as some kind of saviour from the north or from the west. The only way we're going to make progress is when people like me work ourselves out of a job. Countries no longer need the money that we have provided and continue to provide, and of course we will do for emergencies, and that we work in genuine partnership where we can provide evidence, research, technical expertise, but policy debates, recognising that the government in charge of their sovereign country and the people themselves have to take over the ownership, which of course they have already, but when you're devising reforms or how we're going to make changes, how will Pakistan itself grip the learning outcome challenges, getting children back into school, allowing children to be children from 2 years through to 18 years and beyond, and dealing with climate change. It has to be context specific, and I can't decide that. I wouldn't dream of doing it. We have to talk to men, women, children on the ground and say, what does it need to look like? But what we've done so far, all of us, is get children into school and slightly miss the fact that they've not been learning. If 80% of your 10-year-olds can't read, and you're not alone in that at all, and we have a huge problem in the UK, if they can't read, then parents are going to pull their children out of school because they'll think, we might as well keep them at home, and we have to change that for the children, for the parents, and also for the future of the country.
Well, thank you so much for saying that, and thank you so much for being so wise with it as well, where every stakeholder really needs to come together in making sure whether what we call education is educating our children or not. But very quickly towards the end, I would want to move on to Ms. Saima over here, because the British High Commission is actually organizing this conference over here. I think it's going to be a 2-day conference. The Prime Minister of Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Mia Mohammad Shahbaz Sharif, will be inaugurating this conference. Please tell us a little about it and who will be the participants, and can anybody join probably or show up at the conference if me and Hajra feel like it? How does it work?
Thank you. Yes, first of all, everyone's welcome to join. As I said, we want to seriously reflect on what we've achieved, but we have a long way to go. You mentioned the Prime Minister, as Judith said, he's been a huge champion of education and supporter of our work in Punjab. And the conference is really focused on 5 or 6 key themes. One, which I talked about earlier, which is to reflect on the decade of work in education in Pakistan and what we've learned from that. The second is to look at the transformations that we've seen in education in these 2 provinces where we've worked, but of course in many other parts of Pakistan as well, but KP and Punjab. Thirdly, to reflect and to see what works in education both globally and in Pakistan. So this is the research and the evidence. We also want to talk about the importance of citizen engagement, and I talked about the campaign that we had earlier on, Alif Elan, but where do we go from here, and how do we sustain citizen and political engagement for things like education and for other social causes. And finally, girls' education, which is really at the core of what we want to do going forward, and improving foundational learning. So there are quite a number of sort of themes with sessions on each one of them, which look at both the actual practice and the evidence emerging on some of these areas.
Oh, that's wonderful, and we would want to wish you best of luck as well. And thank you very much, Ms. Judith, for taking our time and being with us. Thank you very much, Ms. Rachel, and thank you very much, Ms. Saima.
Thank you so much.
And towards the end, ladies and gentlemen, I certainly, from the bottom of my heart, I would want to thank the government for making sure that you're going to lend us that helping hand, which is going to educate our future generations over here in the country, in Pakistan, which will help us grow, prosper, and be together and be in sync.
So until next time, it's a goodbye, Allah Hafiz, and good morning.
Have a great day.